Amber learned the difference between quiet and silence on the first week she worked the overnight shift. Quiet was what you got in town, even at 3 in the morning. Distant tires on pavement, a radio somewhere, a dog that belonged to someone. Silence was what waited out here, beyond the last cluster of porch lights, where the highway unspooled through sage and low rock like a strip cut into the earth. Silence didn't arrive all at once. It settled in layers, as if the dark had weight. Her gas station sat alone on a wide pull-off, with a convenience store bolted to the front like an afterthought. 2 pump islands, a small garage that was never used anymore, and a battered ice chest outside that had taken so much sun, the plastic looked chalked. The place had a name on the sign, but half the letters had died years earlier. From the road, the station looked open, even when it wasn't, because the canopy lights never fully shut off. The owner said it discouraged vandalism. Amber suspected it just made the building easier for the night to find. She worked from 10 to 6, 5 nights a week, because the pay was steady and the questions were minimal. She liked minimal. She'd moved out here after a messy year that had left her wanting distance more than comfort. The job came with a small trailer behind the property, thin walls, rattling windows, a heater that groaned like it resented being asked to do anything. She told herself it was temporary. Then the weeks piled up, and the station began to feel like a point on the map that belonged to her. The first time she heard the back door move, she assumed it was the wind. That door wasn't meant for customers. It opened onto the storage hall and the cramped office where the safe sat, and beyond that the garage bay filled with old shelves, mop buckets, and boxes that never seemed to shrink, no matter how much Amber stocked. The back door had a metal bar, a simple latch, and a strip of torn weather seal that let dust in. It was also the only door that didn't ring a bell when it opened. She had been counting cigarettes behind the counter when the sound happened. A faint tap, then a longer scrape, as if something had leaned its weight against the metal. Amber froze with a carton in her hand, listening. The front of the store was bright, the aisles clean enough to pass, the coffee machine off because she never trusted it overnight. The glass windows faced the highway, and beyond them, the darkness looked thicker than it should. An unlit ocean pressed against the station's light. Another scrape slightly lower. Amber set the carton down without looking at it. Her first thought was that someone had come around back to mess with the door, kids maybe, or a drifter. Her second thought was that no one came out here at this hour unless they had to. She walked around the counter, each step loud on the tile. She didn't call out. She didn't want to announce her position to something she couldn't see. In the hallway, the air changed. The store smelled like detergent and warmed plastic. The back smelled like cardboard motor oil that had soaked into concrete long ago, and an underlying dampness that didn't belong in the desert. She reached the door and placed her hand on the metal. It felt cold. Too cold for a building that had been holding heat all evening. The latch was still set. The bar was still in place. Whatever had touched it from the outside hadn't opened it. Amber pulled the small window shade aside. The station's floodlight threw a harsh cone across the gravel behind the building. The light revealed the dumpster, the weeds along the fence, the side of her trailer, and nothing else. No movement, no person, no animal. Only one thing looked different. Faint lines on the gravel close to the door, like something heavy had been dragged away from it. They were subtle, almost swallowed by the texture of stones, but the tracks had direction, back toward the fence line, then disappearing into the dark where the floodlight ended. Amber let the shade fall back into place. She stood there for several seconds, trying to decide whether she'd imagined the sound. The mind did odd things at night. The owner warned her about that during training. He'd said the lonelier it was, the more your thoughts tried to fill the space. Amber didn't like the idea of her mind being the kind of thing that could generate noises behind locked doors. She returned to the counter. She didn't mention the sound to anyone later, because there was no one to mention it to, and because she didn't want to be the new worker who was afraid of wind. But in the hours that followed, the station's security camera over the back door flickered twice, and the monitor in the office went briefly to static. The first time, Amber assumed it was the old wiring. The second time, she started watching the screen longer than she needed to. The station's overnight traffic was predictable. Truckers who knew the route, travelers who had misjudged their fuel, and the occasional local who treated the place like a personal pantry. Amber could usually hear vehicles before she saw them, because sound traveled far out here. Tires on gravel, a door shutting, the faint clank of a gas cap. Just after 1, the station's bell chimed, and Amber saw headlights sweep across the windows. A vehicle rolled in slowly, almost crawling. as if the driver had never decided whether they wanted to stop. It wasn't a truck. It wasn't a sedan either. It sat high, but not on big tires. Something older and heavy. Amber watched from behind the counter as the vehicle eased to the far pump instead of the closer one. The canopy light over that side was dimmer, half its bulbs dead. People didn't usually choose the darker pump unless the other one was blocked. The vehicle stopped. The engine kept running. For a moment nothing happened. No door opened. No one stepped out. Amber felt the station's light stretching toward the pump, failing to fully reach it. The windshield reflected glare, hiding the inside. Then the driver's door opened slowly, and a man got out. He looked wrong in a way Amber couldn't have explained if she tried. Not wrong like a disguise or a limp. Wrong like the timing of his movements didn't match the moment. He stood beside the car for several seconds, as if listening to something she couldn't hear. He wore a jacket that might have been brown once. His hair was dark and flattened against his head, and his shoulders were sloped as if he carried weight even when his hands were empty. He didn't go straight for the pump. He walked around the vehicle, checking something near the trunk. Then he approached the driver's door again and leaned inside, shifting as if he'd spoken to someone in the passenger seat. Amber leaned forward, focusing, but the glare still hid the interior. The man straightened, turned his head and looked directly at the store windows. Amber's stomach tightened. The distance made it impossible to see his eyes clearly, but she felt the attention like a cold thread. Most customers glanced at the store. This was different. He held the look as if confirming something. Then he went to the pump. Amber told herself to stay calm. She told herself she was safe behind glass and locked doors if she needed to be. The owner had shown her the button under the counter that called the county dispatcher, but the dispatcher was far. Everything out here was far. The man inserted the nozzle, squeezed the handle, and stood unusually still while the fuel flowed. When he finished, he replaced the nozzle with deliberate care, then walked toward the store. The bell chimed as he entered. The air brought in with him smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, like pennies warmed in a fist. Amber kept her face neutral. She didn't ask how he was doing. She didn't offer coffee. She waited. The man moved through the aisles without urgency, choosing items in a way that didn't match normal hunger. A bottle of water, a pack of gum, and a small roll of duct tape from the hardware rack. Then he stopped at the refrigerated case and stood with his back to her. Amber watched his reflection in the glass. His shoulders rose and fell slowly. He didn't open the door. He just stood there, staring at the rows of drinks as if the labels were instructions he couldn't read. After a long pause, he grabbed a sports drink and carried everything to the counter. Amber scanned the items. The register beeped, bright and out of place. She kept her movements steady, the way she'd learned to do in uncomfortable situations. No sudden gestures, no staring, no challenge. The man set a crumpled bill on the counter. His fingers were stained dark, not with dirt exactly, more like old grease that never fully washed off. A worker's hands, but the duct tape didn't match the rest of his purchase. Amber counted change, slid it toward him, and waited for him to leave. He didn't. He leaned slightly closer to the counter, not crossing the line but reducing the distance between them in a way that made the station feel smaller. Amber kept her hands low, close to the drawer, near the hidden button. The man's gaze drifted past her shoulder, toward the hallway that led to the back. His head tilted almost imperceptibly, like he was taking note of the door and the corner where the camera feed monitor was partially visible through the office window. Then his attention returned to Amber. No words came from him, no request, no question. The silence between them was dense enough to press on Amber's ears. After several seconds, the man picked up his bag and turned to leave. Amber watched him go, her muscles staying tense even after the bell chimed again. She watched him cross the lot, and she noticed something she'd missed earlier. The vehicle's rear license plate looked wrong, not unreadable, wrong in color, wrong in spacing, like it belonged to a different state than the front plate. She couldn't name the states. She only knew the mismatch made her skin prickle. The man got in. The engine note changed, deepening as if the vehicle had taken a breath. Then, instead of pulling back to the highway, he drove slowly around the side of the building, disappearing behind the store where the floodlight didn't fully reach. Amber's first impulse was to go to the back door window and check. Her second impulse was stronger, don't. She stayed where she was, watching the front windows, waiting for headlights to reappear on the other side. They didn't. The station felt suddenly exposed, like a lit aquarium in the middle of a black field. Amber glanced at the security monitor in the office. The back camera showed the gravel behind the building, washed in harsh light. Nothing moved. She told herself the vehicle must have parked near the dumpster. Maybe the man was using the outside trash. Maybe he dropped something and was retrieving it. Maybe... The monitor flickered. For a split second, the image warped into horizontal lines. Then it returned, but the angle had shifted slightly, as if the camera had been nudged. Amber's mouth went dry. She stepped into the office and leaned close to the screen. The picture was grainy, and the light back there created deep shadows beyond its reach. At first, she saw nothing. Then she noticed a shape at the edge of the frame, near the fence line where the weeds grew tall. It wasn't clear enough to identify. It could have been a bundled tarp, a discarded jacket, a trash bag caught on brush, but it seemed too tall for that. Amber stared, trying to force her eyes to make sense of it, and the longer she looked, the more the shape felt like a person standing very still, keeping to the boundary where light became darkness. She reached for the mouse, intending to zoom the feed. The monitor went to static again, louder this time, the sound like a sudden storm inside the small office. Amber flinched and backed away. When the image returned, the fence line was empty. Her heartbeat had climbed into her throat. She stood frozen in the office doorway, listening. The store's refrigerator motors hummed. The ice machine clicked. The overhead lights buzzed. From somewhere behind the building, faintly, came another sound, a soft scrape against metal, slow and patient. It wasn't the wind. Amber forced herself to move. She crossed to the counter, kept her eyes on the front lot, and used the store phone to call the dispatcher. Her fingers almost misdialed because her hand was shaking. She didn't speak to an operator for long. She simply reported a suspicious vehicle and movement behind the station, keeping her description factual because fear made people sound unreliable. When she hung up, she checked the windows again. The lot was empty. No headlights, no engine, no silhouette at the pumps. But the darker side of the canopy still held a shadow that looked thicker than it should, like the night had pooled there. Amber waited for the sound of approaching patrol lights. She waited for tires on gravel, for the reassurance of another presence. Minutes passed, stretching. The scrape came again, closer now, and Amber realized it was coming from the back door. The same door with the silent latch, the same door without the bell. Amber moved carefully toward the hallway, keeping low behind the shelves as if that would help. The air felt colder near the back, and the smell of damp cardboard strengthened as if someone had opened a hidden container. She reached the hallway and stopped at the corner. The back door was visible down the corridor, its small window shade still in place. The scrape repeated, followed by a soft, rhythmic pressure, something testing the door, not violently, but with persistence, like fingers working along a seam, like someone trying to learn exactly how much force was needed. Amber's hand slid into her apron pocket and closed around the small can of pepper spray she carried, despite the owner's rules. Her other hand hovered near the wall switch that controlled the back floodlight. It was already on, but the switch clicked loudly when touched, and she didn't want to announce herself. The pressure stopped. Amber held her breath. A new sound replaced it, a faint tapping, not on the door but on the wall beside it, moving upward, then downward, as if something outside was tracing the outline of the frame. The tapping stopped at the level of the latch. Then came a quiet, decisive click. Amber's mind refused it at first. The latch was internal. The bar was set. That click sounded like a lock giving way anyway, like a mechanism recognizing the correct shape of something it had been waiting for. The door didn't open, but the gap at the bottom seemed to darken as if a shadow had pressed closer. Amber stepped back, her foot brushing an empty cardboard box. The sound was tiny, but in the hallway, it might as well have been a shout. The tapping resumed instantly, faster now, and Amber realized with a flash of sick clarity that whatever was on the other side had been listening the entire time. Her grip tightened on the pepper spray. The station's front bell didn't chime. No one entered. No one arrived to help. And from behind the back door, something began to slide along the metal again. Slow at first, then steadier, like a blade being drawn across a surface, like someone deciding the door was no longer an obstacle worth respecting. Amber backed away from the hallway door as the scraping grew steadier, less like random vandalism and more like a method. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried intention, the kind that made a locked building feel like a suggestion instead of a barrier. She retreated in short steps toward the counter, keeping her body angled so she could still see down the corridor. The pepper spray in her fist felt small, like a child's toy. Her eyes flicked to the office window, to the security monitor. The back camera showed the door in harsh, washed-out tones, but the frame stuttered, freezing for half a beat before catching up again. The picture made the hallway look longer than it was, and it made her feel like she was watching herself from far away. Another click sounded from behind the metal. The bar should have held. The latch should have held. The only explanation that fit was the worst one. Something was inside the mechanism, or something had found a way to make the lock behave as if it belonged to them. Amber reached under the counter and pressed the emergency button again, not trusting the first call to have done anything beyond filing her voice into the void. The store phone line didn't give comfort. The line gave obligations and delays. She didn't wait for a response. She moved. There was a narrow closet beside the counter, where the owner kept a cheap aluminum baseball bat meant to look like security. Amber had laughed at it on her first day, then stopped laughing when she realized nobody could hear a scream out here. She slid the closet door open. The bat lay on the floor behind a stack of paper towels and a bucket of windshield fluid. The scraping stopped the moment she touched the bat, as if the sound had been designed to measure her patience. Amber froze, listening. The station's hum filled the silence like pressure behind the ears. She took one slow breath, then another. She forced her feet to stay planted. She forced her hands to remain steady. Then the scraping resumed, lower now, closer to the bottom of the door, in the place where the metal met the frame. A thin, deliberate sound, like someone introducing a tool to a seam. Amber moved back toward the hallway, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to see. The closer she got, the colder it felt. The tile under her shoes seemed to lose warmth. The air thickened with the smell of damp cardboard and old oil again, and something else, faint, sharp, almost medicinal, the kind of smell that clung to bandages when they were first unwrapped. She stopped at the corner and leaned just enough to see the door. The shade on the small window had shifted. It wasn't fully up. It wasn't fully down. It hung crooked, as if someone on the other side had touched it, tested it, tried to peek through. Amber's throat tightened. The idea of a face hovering inches from that glass made her skin crawl. The shade jerked once, sharply, like a tug from outside. Amber recoiled, knuckles whitening around the bat. The back door didn't burst open. No hand appeared. No silhouette filled the window. The tug was an announcement, nothing more. Something was there, and it wanted her to know it. A new sound followed, the soft crunch of gravel shifting close to the door, then the faintest shuffle, weight repositioning. The station's floodlight still poured outside, but the light's edge made a cruel border, and whatever stood in the darkness beyond could remain invisible with ease. Amber held her stance, trying to decide whether to run to the trailer, whether to lock herself in the bathroom, whether to climb onto the counter and wait for help like an animal cornered by a storm. Her eyes darted to the office window again. The monitor flickered, then stabilized. The back camera now showed the outside area near the door more clearly than before, as if the sensor had adjusted for movement. The floodlight bleached the gravel silver white. The dumpster sat at the left edge like a crouched animal. The fence line stood still. The weeds barely moved. And near the back corner, just outside the frame's brightest center, the older vehicle was visible, parked tight against the building, angled so its headlights pointed nowhere useful. Amber hadn't heard it move. She hadn't heard the engine idle. The lot absorbed sound out there, but not like that. Not completely. The driver's door was open. No one sat behind the wheel. Amber's pulse hammered. She stepped back from the office window and looked down the hallway again, as if her eyes could catch the thing in the act and force the world to behave normally. The shade on the back door window lifted a fraction higher, not enough to see through, just enough to show that something somewhere had fingers or something that acted like fingers. Amber's mind offered one desperate explanation after another. Wind, loose hardware, a broken shade mechanism, but the movement was too controlled, too patient, too sure of itself. She raised the bat and took 2 slow steps forward. The tapping began again, this time on the glass itself. Soft, steady, centered. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps. Not random, not urgent, measured like a signal. Amber stood still, her breath shallow, her gaze locked on the shade. She didn't want to be in the hallway. She didn't want to be in the building. She wanted the entire station to be something she'd invented and could wake up from. Another set of taps. Then, from the other side of the door, something scraped down the metal in a single, long line, starting near the latch and ending low near the floor. It sounded like a blade or a nail or something hard drawn with intention. Amber took 1 step back. The door shuddered once, not from impact but from pressure, something leaning into it, testing the give. The bar held, The latch held. The door did not open. Amber's legs trembled anyway. Headlights flared suddenly in the front lot, flooding the store windows with moving light. Amber snapped her head toward the counter. A patrol vehicle rolled in, tires crunching gravel, the sound loud enough to cut through the station's hum. It parked near the pumps, its lights washing the canopy and the front glass with blue-white flashes that made the shelves look like a stuttering film reel. Relief hit Amber so hard, it made her dizzy. She moved toward the front, bat still in hand, then stopped. The scraping at the back door had ceased. The tapping had ceased. The hallway behind her had gone completely still, as if the building itself had been holding its breath. Amber didn't wait to see if it would start again. She moved quickly to the front and stood behind the counter, staring through the windows. The patrol vehicle's driver's side door opened. A deputy stepped out, posture alert, scanning the lot and the highway beyond. Amber's muscles tried to unclench and failed. The deputy approached the store entrance. The bell chimed. The air shifted as the door opened and closed. Amber's mind expected immediate safety the way a person expects warmth when they step inside from the cold. But the deputy's eyes didn't soften. They moved quickly over the shelves, the back hallway, the corners, the security camera dome. The gaze wasn't a comfort. It was a confirmation that danger was a thing that could still exist under fluorescent lights. Amber gestured toward the back, toward the office, toward the monitor. She didn't bother with explanations that sounded like panic. She focused on facts. An older vehicle, a man who watched the hallway, the back door sounds, the camera flicker, the open driver door seen on the feed. The deputy turned and went straight for the office, not slow, not relaxed. Amber followed 2 steps behind, bat lowered now but not put away. They stared at the monitor together. The vehicle was still there, pressed against the back corner. The driver's door was still open. The gravel near the door showed faint lines like dragged weight. The fence line looked unchanged, but the weeds along the base had been flattened in a narrow path, as if something had moved through them recently, close enough to the building to stay out of sight. The deputy moved down the hallway toward the back door. Amber stayed near the office threshold, unable to force her feet any closer. The deputy stopped at the door, glanced at the crooked shade, then reached for the bar. The bar was still in place. The deputy lifted it, unlocked the latch and pulled the door open in one smooth motion. Cold air poured in, carrying the smell of dust and something faintly metallic. The floodlight painted the gravel with harsh clarity. No one stood there. No shadow moved. The space behind the station was empty except for the vehicle and the dumpster and the fence line and the weeds. The deputy stepped outside, scanning. Amber hovered in the doorway behind, bat in hand, eyes on every dark seam where light failed. The vehicle's interior looked empty from this angle. The driver's seat was unoccupied. The passenger seat was unoccupied. No movement, no breath-fogging glass, no shifting silhouette. But something sat on the ground near the open driver's door. A roll of duct tape. Not new, not wrapped tight and clean. The outer layer had been peeled back and restuck over and over, leaving it frayed and grey like a scab. Amber's stomach twisted. The deputy picked it up with a gloved hand, turning it slightly as if looking for something caught in the adhesive. A thin strand of hair clung to it, dark, long, and too deliberate to be accidental. The deputy moved around the vehicle, shining a light into the wheel wells, under the chassis, into the trunk seam. The light found nothing that matched a person hiding. It found only dust, old grime, and a damp smear on the rear bumper that looked out of place in the dry night. Amber stared at the smear until her eyes watered. The dampness wasn't oil. It wasn't coolant. It looked like something that had been wiped there by a hand that was not clean. The deputy stepped closer to the rear plate, examining it. The plate's edges were slightly bent. The bolts looked recently disturbed, as if someone had swapped it in a hurry. Then the deputy shone the light onto the gravel behind the car. There were prints. Not clear boot tread the way a person's prints should be, but shallow impressions like pressure points. Toe, heel, almost normal, except the spacing was wrong, too close together, as if the legs that made them were either short or moving in a way that didn't match a natural stride. The prints led toward the fence line, then vanished where the weeds had been flattened. Amber stared into that darker strip beyond the light and felt her body recognize the edge of something it couldn't name. The deputy returned to the back door and closed it, resetting the bar, locking it in place with finality. The motion felt like theater. The night had already shown it didn't care about bars. The deputy checked the front lot, checked the highway, then went back to the patrol vehicle to call for a tow and a second unit. Amber watched from behind the store windows. waiting for the old vehicle's engine to suddenly restart, waiting for it to roll away as if nothing had happened. It didn't move. Instead, the station's power blinked. The lights dimmed for a heartbeat, brightened again, then dimmed once more. The security monitor in the office popped into static, then returned, then static again. Amber felt her chest tighten. The station's hum changed pitch, a brief whine like a machine under strain. The deputy's patrol lights continued flashing outside, but their rhythm looked wrong in the window reflection now, as if the flashes were slightly delayed, out of sync with the actual vehicle. Amber turned her head toward the back hallway. The crooked shade on the back door window had shifted again. It was fully up now. The glass showed only the floodlit gravel beyond. But on the inside of the glass, pressed from the interior side, were streaks, long, faint and oily, like fingertips had dragged downward from the top edge. Not from someone outside, from someone who had been inside the building long enough to touch the glass and leave a mark. Amber backed away from the hallway, every hair on her arms lifting. The deputy hadn't come back inside yet. The building's lights flickered a third time, and from somewhere deeper than the hallway, somewhere between the office wall and the storage room, came a soft, shuffling movement, careful and contained, like something repositioning itself to remain unseen. Amber tightened her grip on the bat until her fingers hurt. She didn't step forward. She didn't call out. She watched the hallway and waited for the next sound to prove she wasn't alone in the light. Warren took the night route because it was faster, not because it was safer. He hauled freight in a white box truck with faded company decals and a cab that smelled like coffee, stale air freshener, and the low, constant heat of an engine that never quite cooled down. His deliveries didn't care if he was tired. They only cared about timestamps and signatures. The dispatcher had suggested the main interstate, but it added an hour, and Warren had already lost time at the last stop when a dock door wouldn't open. So he chose the cut-through highway. 2 lanes, no median, long stretches with no cell coverage, and only occasional light from ranch entrances. He knew the route well enough to respect it. He also knew you could respect something and still underestimate it. His fuel gauge dropped faster than he expected, dipping below a quarter before the next town marker appeared. The wind had shifted, pushing against the truck's broad side like a hand insisting he slow down. Warren kept going anyway, eyes fixed on the dark road ahead and the pale reflectors that marked the shoulder. Then, far off, a glow appeared, thin and steady, like a ship's light on a black sea. The gas station came into view gradually, first as canopy lights, then as a small building, then as a hand-painted sign mounted too low, half hidden by weeds. The place looked open, but the parking lot was empty. No other vehicles at the pumps, no movement behind the windows, just fluorescent light spilling onto gravel. Warren pulled in and chose the pump closest to the store, preferring to stay in the brightest part of the lot. He shut off the engine and stepped out. The cold hit him instantly, dry and sharp. The air smelled like dust and gasoline, and something faintly sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in heat. He began fueling, keeping his eyes on the windows. The store interior looked clean in the way forgotten places sometimes looked clean, too orderly, too still, like nobody had walked through in hours. The aisles were visible, the counter at the front, the cooler doors lined up, but he couldn't see a worker. No shadow moved behind the register. No head lifted from a magazine. Nothing. Warren kept fueling anyway. He needed the gas. He didn't like the emptiness, but he'd stopped at isolated stations before. Sometimes the clerk hid in the back to avoid drunks. Sometimes the clerk slept. Sometimes the clerk had stepped outside to smoke in the cold. The pump clicked off. Warren replaced the nozzle, then walked to the store entrance. The door opened with a reluctant squeal, and a small bell chimed overhead. The sound was bright and wrong against the station's stillness. No one appeared. Warren stepped inside. The warmth smelled like heated plastic and cleaner. The fluorescent lights buzzed in a steady pitch that felt like it pressed on his skull. He looked toward the counter. The register screen was on. A small lamp glowed behind the counter. A clipboard sat out with a pen chained to it. Everything suggested someone should be here. Warren waited, eyes scanning the corners. He moved closer to the counter, careful not to make himself look like a threat. He set his wallet on the counter's edge, then tapped the bell button meant for customers. The bell made a dull, tired sound. No footsteps came from the back. Warren's skin prickled. He considered leaving cash and walking out, but he didn't know the total amount of fuel, and the pumps out here sometimes required the register to authorize payment. He glanced at the hallway behind the counter. the one leading into a darker part of the building. The air back there looked cooler, as if the light couldn't warm it. He checked the aisles again. Still no worker. Warren decided to grab a bottle of water while he waited, a small anchor of normal behavior in a place that didn't feel normal. He walked to the cooler, opened the glass door, and felt cold air spill over his hand. The refrigerated hum layered over the fluorescent buzz, creating a strange vibration in his teeth. He chose a water, closed the door, and turned back toward the counter. Something had changed. A thin strip of paper lay on the counter near the register, like a receipt that had just printed. Warren hadn't heard the printer. He walked up and stared at the paper. It wasn't a normal receipt. It had the station's name at the top, but the letters were smeared, as if the ink ribbon had been dragged. Beneath that, instead of item codes and prices, there were rows of numbers that didn't match any format he recognized. Long strings, broken by dashes, repeating patterns like coordinates. Warren reached for the strip. The receipt printer whirred suddenly, fast, aggressive, and another strip began to emerge, curling downward like a tongue. Warren stepped back instinctively, the water bottle cold in his hand. The printer kept going. Paper fed out in a steady stream, spilling onto the counter, then onto the floor. The numbers weren't random. They repeated with slight variations, like a list that had been written and rewritten, corrected, refined. Warren stared at the growing pile and felt his chest tighten with a quiet alarm. Machines didn't do this without reason. Either someone had triggered it, or something was wrong in the system. He leaned closer, eyes tracking the numbers. In the center of the newest strip, among the repeated patterns, one line looked different. It wasn't a number. It was a timestamp, not the current time. A timestamp from earlier, hours earlier, followed by a short phrase that didn't belong on any receipt. The words were faint and broken by ink smears, but the meaning punched through the distortion. Pump 2, no sale, door open. Warren's gaze snapped toward the front windows, toward the pumps outside. Pump 2 sat farther down the lot, under dimmer canopy bulbs, and beside it, in the shadow between light and dark, a vehicle sat parked at an angle, one Warren hadn't noticed when he pulled in. Its headlights were off. Its body was dark, swallowing light, and it blended into the night like it had grown there. Warren stood perfectly still, water bottle clenched hard enough to hurt, staring at the shape outside. The receipt printer kept whirring behind him, feeding paper like a warning that wouldn't stop. Warren didn't remember setting the water bottle down, but it was suddenly on the counter, sweating a small ring into the laminate. His hands hovered near it like it was the only solid thing in the building. Outside, the dark vehicle near Pump 2 sat angled under the sickly canopy glow, still enough to be mistaken for a shadow if you didn't know what cars were supposed to look like. The receipt printer's whine climbed and fell in a rhythm that resembled breathing. Paper continued feeding out, strip after strip, curling into itself, folding over the counter edge, then slithering down until it touched the floor. The pile had become a pale nest of inked warnings. Warren moved closer without meaning to. He didn't want to, but his eyes kept snagging on the numbers, trying to assemble a pattern because the mind hated loose ends. The newest line didn't look like coordinates anymore. It looked like the kind of code used by dispatchers. Time blocks, abbreviations, small fractures of meaning. Another timestamp printed, and under it came something that made Warren's throat tighten. Cab light, driver door, open. Warren's head snapped toward the front windows again. His truck sat where he'd parked it, facing the store. The cab light was on. He hadn't left the door open. The idea hit him like a sudden fever. He had closed it. He remembered the weight of it, the bounce of the latch. He stepped around the counter and walked fast to the door, pushing it open. Cold air slapped his face. The canopy lights buzzed overhead. His truck loomed close and familiar, but the driver's door was cracked, open just enough to show the pale interior light shining on the seat. Warren stopped on the threshold. He listened. No engine, no footsteps, no wind strong enough to move a door that far. He stepped off the curb and approached the truck cautiously, scanning the ground. The gravel under his boots looked disturbed near the cab, scuffed in shallow arcs, but not in the clear way a second person's footfall should appear. The marks were smeared, as if something had dragged itself close while keeping its weight low. Warren reached the door and pulled it shut hard. It closed with a solid clack. The cab light clicked off. He stood still with his hand on the handle, waiting for the universe to correct itself and become normal again. A faint sound came from the far side of the lot. Metal, touching metal, light but certain. Warren looked toward Pump 2. The dark vehicle's driver's side door was now open. It hadn't been open a moment ago, he would have seen it. The angle was clear under the dimmer bulbs, a black wedge against grey light. The open door created a sharp line that looked like a mouth, held in a silent invitation. Warren backed toward the store without turning his back fully, every instinct insisting that distance was safety and light was safety, even as the station's light now felt like a trap set for moths. He reached the door and went inside, letting it shut behind him with an ugly squeal. The bell chimed again, cheerful and stupid. The printer still screamed. Warren went behind the counter and yanked open the register drawer, looking for anything that could help him anchor the moment in ordinary reality. Keys, a handheld scanner, a phone, anything. The drawer held small bills and coins and a stack of scratch-offs. Beneath them was a laminated instruction sheet for resetting the pumps. In one corner, a landline phone sat with its cord coiled too neatly, like it hadn't been used in a long time. Warren picked up the receiver and pressed it to his ear. No dial tone. He looked at the cord and saw it wasn't plugged into the wall. The unplugged cord dangled behind the counter like a dead vine. Warren's eyes flicked to the back hallway. The air there looked darker than it had earlier, not because the light had changed, but because his attention had. The hallway ended in a closed door with a sign that read, "Employees Only." The sign looked too clean, too new for the rest of the place. The receipt printer spit out another strip. Warren leaned over it. The ink was darker now, less smeared, as if the machine had found clarity. Pump 2, door open, no cashier. Then, on the next line, Pump 2, door open, return. Warren stepped back so hard his shoulder hit a shelf of chips. Bags rustled like startled insects. The word return wasn't a product code. It wasn't a normal message. It felt like a command, not from a machine, but from whatever had decided the machine was a useful mouth. Outside, the canopy light above Pump 2 flickered once, then steadied. Warren moved to the window and squinted. The open door of the dark vehicle remained ajar. No one emerged. No shape shifted in the driver's seat. The windshield reflected the canopy bulbs, hiding everything behind it. Then the vehicle's interior light came on, pale and sudden. For a fraction of a second, Warren saw something inside. Not a face, not a body, but a pale blur low in the seat area, like a bag slumped in a posture meant for a person. The light made it look wrong, like the object had edges that didn't match the seat's contours. The interior light snapped off. Warren's breath came shallow. He forced himself to move, to do something that wasn't just staring. He couldn't stay in the store forever. He couldn't go back to the truck with that other vehicle watching from the darker pump. He grabbed the water bottle, not because he needed it, but because holding something made him feel less exposed. He moved along the aisles looking for a back exit, a second door, anything that didn't require him to cross open lot. The building was small. There was no back exit, only the employees' only door, and beyond it, the unknown. The printer's whine changed pitch, then stopped. Silence rushed in so fast it felt like pressure. Warren stood behind the counter, listening to the hum of refrigeration and the buzz of fluorescent lights. Without the printer, the store sounded smaller. The quiet made it easier to hear things that were not supposed to be heard. A soft click came from the front door. The bell didn't chime. The door didn't open. The click sounded like the lock turning, as if someone outside had tested it, found it secure, and moved on. Warren's skin tightened. He checked the door. It was still locked from his side, the bolt set. Another click came, not from the door, but from the counter area. Warren turned. The receipt printer was alive again, but it wasn't printing a stream now. It printed a single strip, slow and deliberate, as if choosing words. The strip fed out and stopped. Warren leaned close enough to smell the warm ink. Garage Bay. Open. Warren stared at the words, then looked past the counter toward the side of the store where a narrower door sat, painted the same off-white as the walls, half hidden behind a rack of windshield wipers. He had assumed it led to storage. The sign above it was faded, but in the right angle of light it still read Garage. Warren hadn't seen that door move. He hadn't even noticed it before. His mind replayed the moment he entered. The aisles, the counter, the cooler. He had not walked near that side door. He had not touched it. He moved slowly toward it now, the water bottle clenched like a weapon. The air grew cooler as he approached, carrying a different smell, wet concrete, old rubber, and the stale metal tang of a place that had once held engines. The door handle was slightly turned as if it had been left loose. Warren hesitated, then pulled it open. The garage bay beyond was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb. The room stretched deeper than he expected, wider too. Old service space with a concrete floor stained dark in overlapping circles. Shelves lined the walls with dusty bottles, empty cardboard boxes, and tools that looked too organized to be abandoned. At the far end, a rolling bay door stood partially raised, open by a foot or two, letting in a thin stripe of night and cold air that slid across the floor like a living line. Warren's eyes dropped to the gap under that bay door. The gravel outside was disturbed in a trail leading inward, as if something had been dragged into the garage, then pulled back out again over and over, testing the space. His stomach tightened. He backed away from the garage door, intending to shut it and lock it, but a sound came from outside through the narrow bay door gap, a low scrape, slow, moving closer. Warren froze. The scrape stopped directly in front of the gap, as if whatever made it had positioned itself there with care. The thin stripe of night under the bay door darkened, blocked by a shadow. Then something slid into view beneath the door, entering the garage through the foot-high opening. It wasn't a hand. It wasn't a tool. It looked like a strip of fabric at first. Black, glossy, narrow, pushing forward inch by inch. Then Warren realized it was duct tape, peeled out long and dragging. The adhesive side faced up, catching dust and grit. The tape advanced like a tongue, creeping over concrete in a slow, purposeful line. The tape stopped. A second strip appeared beside it, sliding in from the other side of the gap, parallel and careful, then a third. The strips aligned on the concrete like the beginning of a boundary being drawn. Warren's breath caught. He stumbled back into the store, slamming the garage door shut and throwing the latch. The metal click sounded thin. He sprinted to the counter and grabbed the bat behind it. An old wooden bat kept under the register, more for show than protection. He didn't think. He moved on instinct, back to the front windows, searching for movement. Pump 2's vehicle door was still open. His truck sat under the canopy light, driver's door shut now, cab dark. The lot looked empty, but the emptiness felt staged, like a room after someone had hurriedly hidden. Warren's eyes dropped to the ground near the entrance. A strip of receipt paper lay on the floor by the door, separate from the earlier pile. It hadn't been there before. He picked it up. The ink was heavy and clear. Return then. Beneath it, sign. Warren's gaze snapped to the counter. A clipboard sat there, the one he'd noticed earlier. The pen chained to it gleamed in the light. A signature line waited at the bottom, blank, with no name printed above it, no reason for him to sign. He stared at it, then looked toward the back hallway, then toward the garage door, then back to the front windows. The station felt like it had become a process, an instruction list, a trap that required his participation to close. Warren tightened his grip on the bat and did the only thing that felt like his own decision. He moved quickly out the front door, crossed the open lot at a run, and climbed into his truck. He jammed the key into the ignition and turned it, forcing the engine to start with a cough and a roar. The cab filled with vibration. The mirrors shook. He threw the truck into gear and pulled forward hard, gravel spitting beneath the tires. As he passed Pump 2, the open vehicle door swung slightly, as if pushed by air. For an instant, the interior light flared again, and Warren saw the driver's seat clearly. It was empty, but the seatbelt was drawn across it, buckled as if holding something in place. The belt tightened suddenly, jerking once, as if something unseen had shifted against it. Warren's truck surged onto the highway, headlights cutting into darkness. He didn't slow until he reached the first stretch where cell service returned, and his phone exploded with delayed notifications. He didn't look at them. He kept driving. Later, when he finally stopped at a rest area miles away, he climbed down to check his trailer seal and found a strip of receipt paper tucked under his windshield wiper, pressed tight by the wind. It wasn't from any printer he recognized. The paper held one line of ink, no sale. Heather didn't plan to stop. She had left her job site late, driving a company sedan that smelled like carpet cleaner and sun-baked vinyl. Her work kept her on rural roads more often than highways, taking inventory of utility poles, photographing equipment, marking locations on a tablet that never held a charge as long as it claimed. That night, she'd pushed the route too far, chasing one last flagged marker before heading home. The result was a fuel gauge needle hovering too close to empty on a road that offered nothing but fence line and scrub. The station appeared like a mistake in the landscape, light where there shouldn't be light. A canopy with half-dead bulbs. A small store with windows too reflective to see inside. A sign out front that had been repainted so many times the letters looked swollen. Heather pulled in because she had no other option. The car's low fuel chime had been polite at first, then persistent, then accusatory. The lot was empty except for a single orange traffic cone placed near the entrance, like a warning left behind by someone who'd driven off and forgotten it. The cone sat upright, clean, almost too bright against the gravel and dust. Heather parked near the closest pump and stepped out. Cold air pressed against her cheeks. The silence out here wasn't peaceful. It was vacant, as if the world had ended just beyond the station lights and no one had thought to mention it. She began fueling and noticed the pump's display lagged. The numbers climbed in slow jumps rather than smooth increments. The nozzle vibrated faintly, the way it did when the line had air in it. Heather glanced toward the store windows. No movement. The door looked closed. The neon open sign glowed, but its hum felt like a weak lie. She finished fueling quickly and replaced the nozzle. The pump beeped, then beeped again, then went quiet. When she turned toward the store, she realized the orange cone had moved. It was no longer near the entrance. It sat beside her car's rear tire, close enough that she would have hit it when backing out. Heather froze, staring at it. Wind didn't move cones like that without tipping them. People moved cones. But the lot had been empty, and the store window still showed nothing behind the glare. Heather's eyes scanned the perimeter, the dark edges beyond the canopy, the shadows near the building corners, the line of scrub beyond the lot. Nothing shifted. No figure stepped into view. She walked around the cone and approached the store entrance. The bell above the door was the only part of the place that seemed lively. It chimed when she pushed inside, sharp and eager. The air smelled like old fryer oil and lemon cleaner. The fluorescent lights were bright enough to hurt. A row of coolers hummed along one wall. A coffee station sat in the corner with a pot that looked like it had been cooked dry. Heather went to the counter, expecting a clerk to appear from the back. No one did. She waited. The silence inside the store had a different quality than outside. Outside, silence felt like open space. Inside, it felt confined, trapped in the aisles and pressed into the corners. Heather leaned slightly forward, peering past the counter into the hallway behind. A door stood half open at the end, the darkness beyond thick as a curtain. A faint smell drifted from that hall, damp cardboard, rust, and something faintly sour. Her gaze dropped to the counter. A stack of receipts sat beside the register, but the top one wasn't flat. It was folded into a triangle, like a small flag. The fold looked deliberate, crisp. Heather didn't touch it. She shifted her attention to the register screen. It displayed a transaction total for fuel, but the numbers were wrong. Too high, far higher than the car could have taken. The gallons count on the pump outside had seemed normal, but here, on the register, it looked like she'd filled a truck. Heather's skin prickled. She checked her wallet, then looked back down. The total changed, not because she pressed anything. It blinked once, then dropped to a lower number, then blinked again and dropped further, as if something unseen was recalculating how much it wanted from her. The bell didn't chime. The door didn't open, but Heather heard a soft scrape behind her, close to the entrance. She turned. The orange cone was inside the store now, placed upright just inside the doorway, blocking it. Heather stared, her mind trying to reject what it was seeing. The cone hadn't tipped. It hadn't rolled. It stood as if someone had carried it in carefully and set it down. Heather moved toward it and reached out, intending to shove it aside and leave. Before her hand touched it, the cone shifted slightly, just a small slide across the tile, aligning itself more squarely in the center of the doorway. Heather stopped, hand hovering. The cone's reflective strip caught the fluorescent light and flashed too bright, like a camera flare. Heather backed away from the door and returned to the counter, forcing herself to think in steps. The store had to have a clerk. The station had to have some explanation. The cone had to have been moved by someone playing a prank. Her mind reached for ordinary answers the way a drowning person reached for driftwood. She leaned over the counter and pressed the small service bell. The bell made a dull click. A second later, from the back hallway, a different sound answered. A faint tap, then another like fingernails on a hard surface, slow and patient. Heather's mouth went dry. The taps moved closer, not in footsteps but in contact points, like something brushing along the wall as it approached, making sound without fully revealing itself. Heather's eyes darted to the hallway. The half-open door at the end had shifted wider. Darkness spilled out. Then something pale caught the light near the floor, an object sliding forward, a receipt. It crept across the tile from the hallway like it had been pushed by an unseen hand, inching toward the counter. The paper stopped at Heather's feet. Heather stared down at it. The receipt wasn't from a register. It had no logo, no store name, no transaction details. It contained only one printed line, centered and clean. Wait. Heather's chest tightened. She looked up, scanning the store again. The cone remained by the entrance, blocking the simplest exit. The windows reflected her own face back at her, pale and sharp-eyed. The tapping from the hallway stopped. In the sudden quiet, Heather heard another sound, soft, steady, very close to the entrance door. A scrape of rubber against tile. The orange cone was moving again, not sliding randomly, but pivoting slightly, as if turning to face her. Heather's hand stayed suspended in the air, fingers curled as if she could still pretend she wasn't about to touch anything strange. The orange cone pivoted again, a careful little shift that shouldn't have been possible without someone's hand guiding it. Its base scraped softly across the tile, making a sound that felt intimate in the empty store. Too close, too deliberate. Heather backed away from it, and the cone stopped moving immediately, as if it didn't need to chase her. As if it already had what it wanted. Her attention, her awareness, her sense of the door no longer being hers. The receipt on the floor at her feet still read, "Wait." The paper's edges fluttered once, not from wind, but from the subtle pressure changes of a building breathing through cracks. Heather's gaze snapped from the receipt to the hallway again. The half-open door at the end, employees only, held darkness behind it, like a held breath. No footsteps came. No cough, no creak, no indicator of a normal person. Heather moved behind the counter, not because it offered protection, but because it offered distance from the cone. She found a second service bell and pressed it again, harder this time, forcing noise into the space like a flare. The bell clicked. The hallway answered with a different sound now, the faint roll of something round against the tile, slow and uneven, approaching. Heather's eyes widened. Her mind tried to assemble the sound into something harmless. A dropped bottle, a coin, a cap, but the sound was too steady for something that had simply fallen. It rolled, paused, rolled again, as if it was being sent forward. A small object emerged from the hallway, an orange plastic cap, the kind used on traffic cones to keep water or sand inside. It rolled toward the counter, stopped in the middle of the open floor, and then tipped onto its side as if it had completed its job. Heather stared at it. Then she looked at the cone blocking the door. The cone's top looked open now. The hole was visible, dark and round, like a missing tooth. Heather's mouth went dry. The cap had come from that cone. The cone had been sealed. Now it wasn't. And the cap had arrived from the hallway, not from the entrance. Her gaze crawled back to the register. The screen glowed with her fuel total. Still wrong, still fluctuating, as if the amount was being negotiated by something that didn't understand volume, but understood leverage. The numbers blinked down again, then held. A soft metallic click came from somewhere near the front of the store. Heather turned her head. The door lock had shifted. The little metal latch on the inside, the one that slid into place when the store was closed, was now engaged. She hadn't touched it. The cone remained in front of the door like an extra insult. Heather's heart hammered. She didn't think of heroics. She thought of exits. The bathroom, maybe. A back door. A window that opened. Anything. She scanned the walls. The windows were wide panes that didn't look like they opened at all. The bathroom door was tucked near the back, beside the hallway. The garage bay door, if there was one, might be behind that employees-only door. She hadn't noticed one from outside, but the building's shape suggested an old service area. Heather moved fast toward the bathroom, keeping her eyes on the hallway. The orange cap sat in the middle of the floor like a marker. She skirted it without stepping close, the way people avoid objects they don't trust to stay still. She reached the bathroom door and yanked it open. The bathroom light was on already, casting a sterile glow on tile and a cracked mirror. The sink dripped, not steadily, but in a slow pattern that felt too rhythmic. Heather stepped inside and checked the small window above the toilet. It was narrow, frosted, and sealed shut. Even if it opened, it wouldn't fit a person. The vent fan cover sat in the ceiling, old and dust-choked. Heather turned back toward the store and felt her pulse spike. The cone was no longer by the front door. It stood directly outside the bathroom entrance now, upright and centered, so close to the threshold that its bright orange surface filled her view like a warning sign someone had shoved into her face. Heather stumbled back into the bathroom, cold fear turning her limbs stiff. She slammed the door and locked it, gripping the handle as if pressure alone could reinforce the cheap latch. The cone remained outside, motionless. Heather stood with her back against the wall, listening for anything that sounded like a human being. The The store remained silent except for refrigeration hum and the occasional fluorescent buzz. The bathroom's dripping sink became loud in her ears. Then came a new sound, faint at first, paper sliding on tile. Heather held her breath. The sound moved closer to the bathroom door, stopped, then resumed as if adjusting position. A soft scrape sounded against the bottom edge of the bathroom door. Something thin pushed against the gap, trying to slide under. Heather watched, horrified, as a receipt edge appeared beneath the door. It didn't flutter. It didn't drift. It was fed forward with careful pressure, inch by inch, until the strip lay flat on the bathroom tile inside. Heather stared down at it. The paper was clean, crisp. The ink was fresh. One line printed, centered. Not here. Heather's stomach dropped. Her gaze snapped to the door, then to the gap beneath it, expecting another strip to follow. Instead, the toilet flushed. Heather didn't move. She hadn't touched it. The flush handle hadn't been pulled. The sound roared in the small room, then slowed, then stopped, leaving the bowl refilling with a gentle hiss. Heather's eyes slid to the mirror. For a moment, she saw only her own face, pale, wide-eyed, a sheen of sweat at her hairline. Then the mirror's reflection changed at the edge. A second shape appeared behind her shoulder, not fully formed, more like the suggestion of a person standing in the doorway of the bathroom, except the doorway in real space was blocked by the door she'd locked. Heather spun around. The bathroom was empty. She looked back at the mirror and the shape was gone, but a new detail had appeared on the mirror surface. A faint smear, as if someone had pressed a hand against the glass and dragged their fingertips down. The streaks were oily, like the ones left by a headlight mechanic's hands. They weren't there moments ago. She would have seen them. Heather backed away from the mirror, breath coming in tight pulls. Her mind reached for the simplest explanation again. Someone was in the store playing a cruel prank, but the movements were too impossible, too controlled. The cone's relocation, the lock engaging, the cap arriving from the hallway, the receipt pushing under the door like a message. Heather put her ear to the bathroom door and listened. No footfalls, no whispering, no cough, only the quiet scrape of rubber against tile, faint and patient, as if the cone was repositioning itself outside. Heather's fingers tightened on the handle. She forced herself to breathe slower, to think in usable steps. If the door opened, she would have to move fast. She would have to get to her car. If the cone was blocking the main entrance, she would have to push it aside and hope the latch didn't hold, or she would have to find another exit through the back. The receipt on the floor said, "Not here." It wasn't advice. It felt like correction. Heather unlocked the bathroom door and opened it a crack, just enough to see. The cone was gone again. The store floor outside the bathroom was empty, except for the orange cap still on its side, and a second receipt now placed beside it, folded into a neat triangle like a direction marker. Heather stepped out quietly, keeping her body low. The folded receipt pointed toward the hallway. She didn't want to go toward the hallway, but the front door she knew was locked. The windows didn't open. The hallway was the only remaining direction that wasn't a dead end. Heather approached the hallway, the air growing colder the closer she got, the smell shifting toward damp cardboard and rust again. The employee's only door at the end was now fully open, as if inviting her to stop pretending she had choices. She paused at the threshold. Beyond was a narrow corridor leading into a garage bay. The bay itself was dim, lit by a single bulb that swayed slightly, though no wind should have reached it. Tool cabinets lined the walls. An old hydraulic lift sat in the center, its metal arms like open jaws, and at the far end a service door stood cracked open to the outside, letting in a thin sliver of night. Heather moved forward, heart pounding, eyes scanning every shadow. The cone was in the garage. It stood near the center, directly beneath the lift arms, upright and perfectly centered, like someone had placed it with care. Its open top faced the ceiling. Heather swallowed hard and kept moving toward the cracked service door at the far end. If she could get outside through the back, she could run along the building to her car and leave. She didn't need to understand what was happening. She only needed distance. She reached the service door and pulled it wider. Cold air rushed in, and with it came the smell of dust and gasoline and the dry, endless night. The station's back lot was empty. No vehicles, no people. Only weeds and fence line and the pale glow of distant road reflectors. Heather stepped outside and turned toward the corner of the building, ready to sprint. The orange cone was there too. It stood outside, at the edge of the service door, as if it had been waiting on both sides simultaneously. Heather stumbled backward, shock knocking breath from her lungs. The cone didn't move. It didn't need to. It simply existed in the places she needed most. Heather's eyes darted to the weeds and fence line. She looked for motion. She looked for a person. Then she saw something on the ground near the building's back foundation, a trail of small orange granules, like sand or fine gravel. The trail started near the cone's base and led toward the darkness beyond the floodlight's reach. Heather's gaze returned to the cone, to its open top. The cone was meant to be filled. Water, sand, weight. But it looked empty. Heather backed away, shutting the service door again and retreating into the garage bay. Her mind screamed to run, but her body couldn't decide where running would matter. As she moved, she brushed against the old tool cabinet, and something fell from its top with a clatter, an ancient flashlight, heavy and scratched. The impact made the bulb flicker alive for a moment, then go steady. Heather snatched it up without thinking and shone it across the garage floor. The beam caught the cone beneath the lift arms. The cone's base was wet, not with water, with something clear and sticky, like an adhesive seep. The wetness trailed outward in a thin smear that looked like it had been dragged, leaving faint tracks on the concrete. Heather's stomach turned. She swung the beam toward the lift arms, toward the ceiling above, searching for any reason the cone might be there. The light caught a strip of duct tape hanging from the ceiling beam, dangling down like a black ribbon, then another strip beside it, and another. They weren't attached randomly. They were arranged in a rough grid, like vertical lines meant to drop down and catch something that moved beneath. Heather stared, heart hammering, and the realization came sharp. The cone wasn't blocking doors to keep her in. It was guiding her, herding her into a specific place beneath the lift arms, beneath the hanging tape, beneath whatever had decided the garage was the correct room. Heather backed away from the center, refusing the suggestion. She moved along the wall instead, keeping distance from the cone and the lift arms, aiming for the hallway that led back to the store. The bulb above swayed once more. The cone shifted, not sliding this time. It tipped slightly, just enough to suggest it could fall, just enough to make Heather's body tense. Heather moved faster, nearly running, reaching the hallway, and the garage's rolling bay door shuddered. Heather looked over her shoulder. The bay door at the front of the garage, the one facing the lot, was lowering slowly on its own, descending with a metallic groan. The opening narrowed, cutting off light from the store side. The door didn't slam. It didn't rush. It closed with measured patience, like something taking its time because it knew time belonged to it. Heather lunged toward the hallway, scrambling through it into the store, and skidded behind the counter. She grabbed her keys off the counter where she'd set them earlier without noticing. She had to reach the front door. She had to force it. She ran to the entrance. The cone was back inside, placed directly in front of the door again. Heather didn't stop. She slammed her shoulder into it, knocking it sideways. It toppled with a hollow thump, rolling on its rim like a wheel for half a turn. The door latch resisted at first, then gave with a snap. Heather yanked the door open and rushed out, the cold air striking like a slap. She sprinted to her car, hands shaking so hard she fumbled the key fob, then finally unlocked it and climbed inside. She started the engine. The dashboard lit up like a small sunrise. She threw the car into reverse, and the orange cone appeared in her rearview mirror, directly behind her bumper, upright and centered. Heather slammed the brakes, breath ragged. She didn't understand how it could be there. She didn't try. She threw the car into drive instead, flooring it forward toward the exit of the lot, gravel spraying. As she passed the station's windows, she saw movement inside for the first time. A shadow crossing the aisle, low and fast, too close to the floor to be a person standing upright. Heather didn't look again. She hit the highway and kept driving until the fuel gauge dipped below half, and her hands finally stopped shaking enough to hold the steering wheel properly. When she reached her job site the next morning to report what happened, she found a bright orange traffic cone placed neatly behind her parking spot, clean and upright, as if it had been waiting all night to arrive before she did. Dawn ran errands late because daylight made her less nervous on rural roads. She wasn't new to isolation. She lived in a small rented house outside a fading town, and her commute already included stretches of highway where phone service dipped and the world felt wider than it should. But she had learned her own limits. Night driving made her feel watched, even when she knew logically there was nothing but darkness and distance. That day, her errands took longer than expected. A shipment delay, a flatbed blocking a narrow road, a detour that turned 20 miles into 40. By the time she pointed her old SUV back toward home, the sun was low and the horizon looked bruised. Her fuel gauge hovered near empty. She told herself she could make it. Then the needle dipped, and a warning light blinked on with a steady insistence. The gas station came into view like a small miracle, a canopy of lights, a low building, and a tall sign that should have been bright but wasn't. Only one price line glowed. The rest were dark, as if the sign had been slowly losing itself over the years. Dawn pulled in and slowed, scanning the lot. The station looked half alive. Several pumps sat under the canopy, but only one had a lit display. Pump 4, the farthest one, closest to the edge of the lot where the light didn't fully reach. The other pumps were dark, their screens blank, their card readers dead. A handwritten sign taped to the store window read, "Power issues, cash only, Pump 4 works." Dawn parked by Pump 4 because she had no choice. The store windows reflected the sky more than the interior. An open sign flickered weakly, its letters uneven. Inside she could see shelves and coolers, but the front counter light seemed dim, not off, dim, like someone had turned it down to save energy. Dawn stepped out and felt the air's dry chill. The canopy light above Pump 4 buzzed, attracting small insects that orbited the bulb like they were hypnotized. Dawn inserted the nozzle and squeezed the handle. Nothing happened. She tried again. The pump display blinked, lagging, then flashed "C cashier" despite the sign insisting this was the only working pump. Dawn exhaled sharply. She hated going inside places like this, places with too much empty lot around them, places where the building was the only solid object in a landscape of black. But she needed fuel. She locked her SUV out of habit and walked toward the store. The door's bell chimed, bright against the dim interior. The station smelled like dust, old coffee and faint gasoline that had seeped into everything. A clerk sat behind the counter. At least Dawn thought it was a clerk at first. The figure was seated low, shoulders hunched, face angled down toward something on the counter. The overhead light above them was weak, creating shadows that softened details. Dawn approached, expecting the figure to look up. It didn't. She stopped a few feet away, eyes narrowing. The figure's posture looked stiff, too stiff, like a mannequin placed in a chair, dressed to resemble a person from a distance. The hair was dark and flat. The jacket looked worn. Dawn's skin prickled. She shifted slightly to the side to catch a different angle of the face. The face was turned away just enough that she couldn't see it clearly. But she saw something that didn't belong. A thin strip of reflective tape stuck across the neck area, like someone had patched a tear with something meant for visibility, not repair. Dawn swallowed and glanced around the store. No one else moved. No footsteps from the back. No refrigerator door opening. The hum of the coolers seemed louder than it should. Then, near the register, the receipt printer whirred. A strip of paper fed out slowly. The seated figure didn't react. The paper slid to the counter's edge and drooped, as if offering itself to Dawn. Dawn leaned forward without meaning to, and read the line printed on it. Pump 4. Only beneath it, another line printed. Don't leave vehicle. Dawn's stomach tightened. She looked at the seated figure again, expecting the head to lift, expecting a hand to move, expecting anything that confirmed a living person. Nothing moved. Dawn backed away from the counter, forcing her breathing to stay quiet. She turned toward the door, intending to leave immediately, to find another station even if it meant risking the fuel. The door didn't open when she pushed it. Dawn blinked and pushed again. The door resisted, as if something held it from the outside. She tried the handle. It moved, but the door didn't budge. The latch felt engaged from the other side. Dawn stepped back, pulse rising. The bell above the door didn't chime. It didn't react at all, as if the door was no longer considered a door. Behind her, the receipt printer whirred again. Dawn turned slowly, eyes fixed on the counter. Another strip printed, longer this time, and the paper advanced toward her like a tongue. The new message wasn't about Pump 4. It was about her SUV. Driver door. Then, after a beat, as if the printer needed time to decide the next word, open. Dawn's heart lurched. She had locked it. She always locked it. She could still feel the key fob in her palm. She rushed to the window and stared out at the lot. Her SUV sat under the canopy light, still and harmless looking. The driver door was cracked open, the interior light glowing faintly. Dawn stood frozen, staring at it, the way a person stares at an injury before the pain arrives. And in the darkness beyond Pump 4, just outside the clean circle of canopy light, something else waited, something low and dark near the edge of the lot, positioned as if it had been there long before she pulled in. Dawn stared through the window glass until her eyes stung, trying to decide whether the driver door of her SUV had truly moved or whether her fear had rearranged the angle of things. The door was open. Not wide, not dramatic, just enough for the interior light to glow like a small wound in the darkness. Her thumb pressed the key fob again and again, until the plastic edge bit into her skin. The locks clicked faintly from outside, a sound that felt too small for what it needed to accomplish. The door didn't close. The interior light didn't go out. Behind her, the store's weak overhead light above the counter buzzed and dimmed once, as if it had drawn breath. The seated figure remained slumped, unmoving, shoulders hunched in the same posture that pretended at being a person. Dawn turned away from the window and faced the counter again. The receipt paper hung from the printer in a longer strip now, its end curling like a leaf. The last printed word, "Open," sat there as if it had always belonged. Dawn's gaze traced the counter surface, searching for something real. A phone, a panic button, a camera monitor, anything that suggested normal systems. The register screen was on, but dim and washed. A small keyring hung from a hook behind the counter. A jar of pennies sat beside a dusty tip cup. Everything looked arranged, but too carefully, like a room staged for a photograph. The figure in the chair didn't blink. Dawn couldn't see its eyes at all. The face was angled down toward the counter, but it was wrong in its stillness. Too perfect, too constant. Her mind tried to fill in the missing details anyway, the way it always tried to humanize shapes in dim light. But the longer she looked, the more the figure became less like a person and more like an object imitating one. The store door behind her gave a soft metallic tick. Dawn spun. The door was still shut, the latch still held, but the tick hadn't come from the handle. It had come from higher, near the top frame, where the hydraulic closer arm sat. The arm shifted a fraction, then settled again, as if a weight outside had leaned against the door and tested it. The thin, open sign flickered, faded, then steadied. Dawn returned to the window, pressing her forehead close to the glass without touching it. The lot outside looked unchanged, but her eyes found the low, dark shape beyond Pump 4 again. It was positioned near the edge of the canopy's reach, like something that understood light boundaries and used them. At first, it looked like a duffel bag discarded near a curb. Then, it looked like a collapsed tire. Then it looked like neither of those things, and her mind refused to decide. The shape shifted slightly. Not far, not fast. A subtle repositioning, like a limb adjusting, like something settling into a more comfortable stance. Dawn's breath turned shallow. She kept her eyes on it and tried to think in options. Option 1, stay inside the store, but the store door wouldn't open. The place had become a locked box. Option 2, find another exit. Most small stations had a back door, most had a storage hallway. She looked over her shoulder toward the darker corridor at the side of the building, the one that led behind the counter. A sign above it read, "Restrooms," and beneath it, a narrower door with a faded label that could have once read, "Stock." Option 3, force the front door, but it felt held from outside as if someone had braced it. The door could be locked from the outside with a key. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the way it resisted, like pressure, not mechanism. Dawn moved cautiously toward the side corridor, keeping distance from the seated figure. The air changed as she left the front area, turning cooler and heavier. The back of the store smelled like wet cardboard and old chemical cleaner. The floor tiles near the corridor had darker scuffs, as if heavy objects had been dragged through repeatedly. She reached the restroom hallway. The first door was labeled Women, the second Men. At the end, a third door stood slightly ajar, the one labeled Stock. Dawn pushed the stock door open. The storage room beyond was narrow and deeper than expected, with shelves stacked high with boxes, paper goods, cases of soda, and cracked plastic bins. The light inside was weaker, a single bulb that made the corners look bruised. The smell was stronger too, damp paper, old oil, dust warmed by stale electricity. She saw the back exit immediately, a metal door with a bar latch and a small square window, a simple way out. Relief hit hard enough to make her dizzy. She crossed the storage room quickly and grabbed the bar latch. It didn't move. She tried again, harder. The bar stayed fixed, as if welded. She leaned into it with her shoulder and felt nothing give. The latch should have been mechanical, should have responded. Instead, it felt like the door had become part of the wall. Dawn peered through the small window. Outside was a narrow strip of gravel behind the building. A dumpster, a fence line, darkness. Nothing that could physically block a door. Her reflection floated in the window glass, pale and strained. Then something passed behind her reflection. Not outside. Inside, behind her, moving across the storage room's dim air. Dawn turned. The shelves stood still. The boxes didn't move. The room looked empty, but the smell shifted. A faint metallic tang slid into the air, like cold pennies pressed in a palm. Dawn stepped back from the door, forcing herself to breathe without making noise. She stood near the shelves and listened. A soft drag came from somewhere deeper in the storage room, behind stacks of boxes, where light didn't reach. The sound was quiet enough to be imagined, but it repeated in the same rhythm. Drag, pause, drag, like something moving while keeping its weight low. Dawn backed out of the storage room, leaving the door open. She didn't want to turn her back on the dark space. She retreated into the hallway and checked the restroom doors, absurdly hoping one contained a window or an exit. She tried the women's door. It opened. The restroom was clean but old, with a flickering light and a mirror that showed everything too sharply. The window above the sink was a narrow frosted pane sealed shut. Nothing usable. The air smelled of bleach and something sour that didn't belong. Dawn stepped back into the hallway and closed the door. A new sound came from the front of the store. The receipt printer whirred again. Dawn froze, then moved back toward the counter, drawn by the machine's insistence. As she approached, she saw the strip of paper longer now feeding out in slow pulses. Each pulse printed a short line, then paused, as if waiting for her to read. Pump 4. Pause. Only. Pause. No run. Dawn's throat tightened. The words weren't a product list. They weren't a transaction. They were instruction. She glanced at the seated figure again. Its head had shifted. Not much. Just enough that its chin angle had changed, as if it had leaned slightly to better face the printer, or to better face her. Dawn stepped back, heart slamming. The figure's jacket collar looked wrong, edged by that strip of reflective tape. The tape caught the weak light and flashed. Her eyes followed it, and she noticed something she hadn't before. The tape wasn't a strip for visibility. It looked like the kind used to seal seams, like someone had wrapped it around a break. Dawn's mind recoiled from the thought. She moved toward the front door again anyway, because the lot outside was still her only path to her SUV, and the SUV was still her only way away from the station. She grabbed the front handle and pulled with force. The door gave a fraction of an inch, then stopped, resisting with pressure that felt like a hand on the other side, firm and patient. Dawn's chest tightened with panic. She pulled again, harder, the metal handle cutting into her fingers. The door didn't budge. From outside, close to the glass, came a soft scrape, rubber or fabric against the base of the door, like something repositioning itself directly in front of the threshold. Dawn stepped back and looked through the window beside the door. The low, dark shape was now closer, not in the open lot, not under the canopy. It sat directly outside the entrance, pressed low to the ground, wide and indistinct. It blocked the view of gravel, as if it had flattened itself to cover as much space as possible. The shape shifted again, and the movement made Dawn's stomach drop. The darkness didn't move like a bag. It moved like a living thing, adjusting. Dawn backed away from the door, eyes wide, trying to keep her breathing quiet. The station felt smaller now, the aisles like narrow trenches that funneled her movement. She glanced left and right, searching for anything she could use, anything with weight, anything sharp enough to feel like control. Behind the counter, a small drawer sat half open. Inside was a wrench, old and heavy, used for stubborn pump caps. Dawn reached in and grabbed it. The metal was cold and reassuring. The printer whirred again. A new line printed, and Dawn's eyes snapped to it despite herself. Driver door. Pause. Close it. Dawn turned toward the window facing pump 4. Her SUV's driver door was still open, the interior light still glowing. Dawn pressed her forehead to the glass again, wrench in hand, trying to decide if she could sprint to the SUV and slam the door shut, then leave before anything stopped her. But the shape at the entrance blocked that route. It wasn't near the SUV. It was near her, near the only door out. She looked deeper into the lot. At the edge of the canopy's light near pump 4, another movement occurred. The low dark shape beyond pump 4, separate from the one at the entrance, or maybe the same thing repositioned, seemed to rise slightly, as if lifting itself to see better. The outline briefly resembled bent limbs, but the light was too weak to confirm. Dawn's gaze flicked back to the seated figure. It was standing now. No scraping chair, no visible movement in the transition. One moment it had been slumped, the next it was upright behind the counter, shoulders squared in a posture that looked like an attempt at human shape. Dawn froze. The overhead light above the counter flickered, and in the brief stutter Dawn saw the figure's face more clearly. There wasn't one, not in the way a face should be. There was a surface, pale and smooth, with the suggestion of features that didn't commit, shallow depressions where eyes might be, a line where a mouth could be, all arranged like a mannequin that had been pressed too hard and lost detail. The reflective tape around the neck looked like a seam holding something together. Dawn's mouth went dry. She tightened her grip on the wrench until her knuckles ached. The figure leaned slightly forward, and Dawn instinctively stepped back. The receipt printer spat out a final strip, faster this time, the paper slapping onto the counter with urgency. Pump 4. Now Dawn's mind snapped into motion. If the station wanted her at Pump 4, then Pump 4 was where it could control her. If the station wanted her outside, then outside was worse than inside. But the driver door of her SUV was open, and the instruction to close it felt like a step in a sequence she didn't want to complete. She looked at the aisle that led toward the store's side window, the one that faced Pump 4. The window itself didn't open, but it gave a view of the pump and the area around it. Dawn moved to it quickly, staying away from the counter. Outside, Pump 4's display was lit. A small green indicator glowed. The nozzle hung in its cradle. Then the pump display changed. Not to a price, not to a prompt. It displayed 3 digits, bright and steady. 406. Dawn stared. It could have been a code, a pump number, a glitch. The digits blinked once, then shifted. 406 again, unchanged, as if insisting. Dawn's phone in her pocket vibrated. She pulled it out with shaking fingers. The screen was dark at first, then lit with a notification, "No service." Then it blinked and for a split second showed 1 bar, just one, before dropping again. But in that split second, a missed call appeared. No name, no number, only digits. 406. Dawn's stomach flipped. She didn't press call back. She didn't open any menu. Her fingers hovered above the screen, frozen by the sense that touching the wrong thing would complete the sequence. Behind her, near the front of the store, the dark shape outside the entrance shifted. The door handle rattled once, softly from the other side, as if someone or something had tested it and found it satisfying that she couldn't leave. The figure behind the counter didn't move closer. It didn't need to. The station itself felt like it was doing the work, guiding her attention, forcing her into alignment. Dawn backed away from the window and moved quickly down the aisle toward a metal display rack near the door, cheap knives and lighters locked behind plastic. She grabbed the rack and yanked it sideways with sudden strength. The metal feet screeched against tile. The rack toppled, clattering loud enough to break the station's oppressive quiet. The noise didn't scare the station. It didn't scare the figure, but it changed something. The front door shuddered once, as if the pressure outside had been surprised. The latch clicked. Dawn didn't wait. She ran to the door and yanked it with both hands. The door opened. Cold night air poured in. The lot's darkness felt enormous. Dawn sprinted toward her SUV, wrench still in her hand. She didn't look at Pump 4. She didn't look at the edges of the canopy light. She kept her eyes on the open driver door, as if it were a mouth waiting to swallow her. She reached it and slammed it shut with all her strength. The interior lights snapped off. For a fraction of a second, the station's canopy lights all flared brighter, every dead bulb seeming to wake at once, then dimmed hard, as if the entire system had been yanked down by an unseen hand. Dawn fumbled the keys into the ignition and turned. The engine hesitated, coughing once. Then it started. Dawn threw the SUV into gear and accelerated, tires spitting gravel. In her rearview mirror, the station's windows glowed faintly, but the open sign had gone dark. Pump 4's display still shone, a tiny green dot in the distance. As she hit the highway, her phone vibrated again. One notification appeared on the lock screen before service dropped completely. Receipt available. Dawn didn't open it. She didn't slow. She kept driving until the station lights were long gone, and the horizon ahead looked like nothing at all. When she finally stopped at a well-lit truck stop near the next town, she checked the SUV's driver door twice, then 3 times, making sure it was closed and locked, making sure it obeyed like a door was supposed to. A slip of paper lay on her driver's side floor mat. Not a store coupon, not anything from her pockets. A narrow receipt strip, perfectly clean, with a single line of ink. Pump 4 paid. Dawn stared at it, then turned her gaze forward and started driving again before the truck stop's lights could begin to feel like another box.